Hello, this video is the first part of my Axial SCX10ii UMG kit build. This part is building the chassis and is just the series of photos I took while doing it. The first stage is building the axles, and the kit comes with metal gears and metal bearings to do this. You start by screwing the main diff gear into the metal locker and then fit the bearings, making two sets for the front and rear axles. Then you put metal bearings into the axles along with a small diff gear which you must grease. Then add grease to the larger diff gear assemblies and fit them into the axles. When this is done, you can screw on the grey diff covers. Now you can fit the wheel shafts into the axles, and I did the front axle first. The kit comes with metal CVDs and metal bearings for this. You fit a bearing to the front and the back of each steering knuckle, and then slide the CVDs into them. Then you slide the shafts into the axle and the knuckles over the C-hubs, fixing them together with the step screws provided. The rear axle is much simpler, and all you do is slide the wheel shafts and bearings into the axle and secure them in place with a couple of screws. This kit comes with metal steering and suspension links, and the next job is to assemble 3 of them for the front axle. There's a long one and a short one for the steering, and a third one for the panhard bar, and when they're assembled you fit them to the front axle. Now you assemble another 3 links which are for the suspension, which you also fit to the front axle. Now you assemble 4 links for the rear suspension and fit those to the rear axle. And this is both axles complete. I'd just like to mention how much I like these metal links which come with the kit. They're nice and beefy, and I especially like the way they're tapered at the ends, which helps you slide over things more easily and lessens the chance of getting caught up. The SCX10ii ready-to-runs do come with metal links, but they're thinner and not tapered, so there's a chance that the rod ends could catch on things, causing problems when you drive over them. Right, now it's on to the shocks, and these are the parts you need to build them. The shock bodies and fake oil reservoirs in the kit version are made of metal. First you have to attach the plastic piston to a rod for each of the 4 shocks with 2 E-clips. Then, using the rest of the parts, you follow the instructions in section 13. I also put some lossy green slime over the O-rings to help make the shocks oil tight. Now it's time to add oil to the shocks. Axial provide a bottle of 30-watt oil in the kit, which is plenty for all the shocks. Follow the instructions for the amount of oil to add and let them sit before you fit the top cap, so any air bubbles will rise to the top and disperse. I usually let mine sit for an hour or so, sometimes overnight. I've put together the rest of the shocks and used a vernier to make sure each one measured 98mm in length as specified in the manual. I added the decals provided to the reservoirs, and that's the shocks completed. The next stage is building the transmission, which is the long version with the low centre of gravity transfer case that also came with my SCX10ii Jeep Cherokee kit. The SCX10ii ready-to-runs come with this transmission, and it sits higher in the chassis. These are the parts you use, which include metal gears, metal bearings and metal shafts. Also in the kit, Axial have included this amendment bag, which contains a revised transfer case which fits better than the one on the original part tree. The first job is to assemble the top shafts and then add grease and fit them into the transmission housing. Then you do the same with the transfer gears and fit the assembled transfer case onto the transmission housing. Now you can put together the slipper clutch and clutch case, making sure you leave an 8mm gap between the back of the nylock nut and the front of the clutch plate. I couldn't fit my vernier in the gap to measure this, so I cut some paper to 8mm and used it as my guide. Now the transmission is assembled, you can fit the motor. For this I treated myself to a brand new Hobbywing 2-in-1 system, which is a 2300 kV brushless motor with a built-in programmable 60 amp ESC. Once you have screwed in the motor, you can adjust the gap between the spur gear and the pinion gear. Axial have this diagram in the instructions showing how to do this, using a piece of paper between the gears which gives the correct gap, more or less. This is the method I've used before on my builds, and also if I change a motor in one of my RCs. When you're happy with the gap, you can tighten the motor screws and fit the cover. Next are the drive shafts. and these have 4 metal pieces at each end of the shaft, and the rest of the parts are plastic. When these are assembled, you can fit them into the transmission using the long grub screws provided, and then fit the mounting plate and brackets which will fix it into the chassis rails. Now you put together the battery tray and the servo mount, which are one unit, and you start by fitting the Velcro battery strap and the 3 brackets which hold the battery in place. Then you assemble the servo mount and fit that to the side of the battery tray. When this is done, you can fit your servo. For this I'm using a new Reedy Power high torque metal gear servo. I bought it from someone who took it out of their new Element Enduro Sendero HD ready to run. Now you're at the stage where you start to fit your parts into the chassis. And this for me is where everything starts to take shape and come alive. This process also has an amendment sheet showing where to fit the rear shock towers on the chassis rails for the correct 288mm wheelbase. The instruction manual shows the incorrect position for a 313mm wheelbase. When you've completed the left hand side, you assemble the right hand side. Now this stage of the chassis is done, you can fit the shock absorbers, suspension links and axles. And this is where my concentration lapsed. I was still working from the amendment sheet and I didn't notice that it went from page 30 to page 31, but then to page 34, which showed how to fit the rear axle assembly, when in fact I should have been working from page 32 to page 33 in the manual, which shows fitting the front axle assembly first. Thankfully it doesn't make any difference which way you do it, but I thought I'd mention it in case any of you axial kit building experts notice that the next series of photos show my rear axle being put on the chassis first. So back to it, and this is both the axles and suspension fitted to the chassis. The next stage in the manual is to stick your ESC to the side plate and your receiver into the waterproof box next to it using servo tape. As my ESC is built into the motor, I only had to put the receiver in the box. Now we're near the final stages of building the chassis, and the next thing to do is fit the front bumper. And the final part is to make up the wheels and tyres. The wheels supplied with the kit are 19-inch plastic bead locks, which I will be using because I think they look good on the Unimog. You get 5 of these, which include one as a spare for the back of the body. They come with foams and Axial 19-inch MT45 soft compound rubber tyres. For the 4 drive wheels I'm using these 5-gram automotive wheel weights. There's enough to stick 8 on the inside of each wheel. This is the spare wheel without weights and the foam and a tyre fitted, weighing in at 127 grams. This is one of the drive wheels with weights and a foam and a tyre fitted, weighing in at 167 grams. This will add some low down weight to help counterbalance the plastic cage on the rear of the Unimog. So that's the chassis complete and the end of this video. I hope you'll join me for the next part of the build, which will be the body. Thank you for watching.